So I think kind of where we want to start is always that kind of higher level contextual question of where retail is more broadly. And I think we've kind of experienced, especially if we think like the last 4 or 5 years, this very, very significant turning point where, 2019, early 2020 were hardcore retail apocalypse. Stores are dying. They're never going to exist again. We have the pandemic. The whole kind of perspective shifts. What have you seen in terms of how retail has changed and how that changes your view on what omni-channel looks like?
Sounds very dramatic. It's interesting though, because before the pandemic, we all were talking about like, stores are dying, what will happen? And then the pandemic just accelerated this concept of will we ever want to shop together in person again? And what's been really interesting to watch is that the pandemic in its own way also accelerated this feeling of I actually want to be back around people and I want to touch and feel the product that I'm buying. And so we actually saw a massive acceleration of our store business coming out of those first couple years of the pandemic and actually had the best year ever for Bloomingdales in 2022. So I think it kind of reset for the customer where their values lie and how they want to be spending their time. They don't want to just be at home at a computer. And I think the pandemic really hit them over the head with that feeling of shopping is not just a means to an end. It's a means to be around people, be with people I love or friends that I want to shop with, and also feel good about seeing product and things in person. So that's what we've been seeing.
I mean, it's such an interesting kind of, you don't want to even call it like an issue, but this idea of shopping as a means to an end is so well put because we lost this idea of, hey, we actually want to go and shop. We want to discover new products and new ideas. And I think, there's something, I think, uniquely challenging when we think about all of the change and volatility for a brand like Bloomingdale's, especially, you have a new CEO, like kind of a new direction and strategy, because you're not just like every other retailer. You have this very intense need to balance a legacy of luxury and an expectation that so many people have for the brand with that desire to innovate and do something new. How do you balance that? How does that inform your decision making?
Yeah, so it's very interesting being a brand that's over 150 years old, but also want to be part of the future for the customer. And we're in good company. Many, many luxury brands are in the same situation. And actually, yesterday at NRF, watching the CEO of Burberry talk with Pete Nordstrom about how Burberry is doing, that was very interesting. And I liked how he put it. He said, we can't live in the past, but we need to think about how we can build an echo. And I like that concept of an echo because you can't totally be reinventing yourself all the time. That's how people forget who you are or lose touch with who you are as a brand. But we're always thinking about how can we build on the trust and authenticity we have from our past while also staying with the consumer into the future. And so I think some of that is very literal in terms of your brand codes and the way your stores look and feel and your branding. But some of that is how you build relationships and the way you make people feel. And so I think that's the end goal that we're going for. The tools that we use to get there, building that human connection and relationship, which is so much what we're about. That's what we're going after. Whether now we're using technology more to get there, that's okay. The customer just cares about that experience with us at the end.
I mean, it's such an interesting, challenge because you want to balance the experience, but you also want to increase kind of elements of convenience. Like we talked about this even with the pandemic of, people like to go and shop, but so much of what we learned in the pandemic is if you give them channels that make it a little bit easier, they might shop more, but it's not kind of binary. There's a consumer that wants convenience or a consumer that wants in store. They all kind of want a mix of everything. And I think that creates a lot of challenges in how you reach the consumer. Again, that emphasis on innovation versus tradition, that emphasis on, in-store white glove experience, especially what we'd expect from a Bloomingdale's versus what you want to do with convenience, which by definition has to strip that back. How do you approach that challenge?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we have to give the customer what they want. And so some customers do not want to speak to a soul when they walk into a store. They want to pick up their buy online, pick up in store order and get out and actually not talk to anyone or do the same thing online. And other people want to hang out for the entire day. And the sales associate is literally their best friend, traveling with them, having lunch with them. And we have to be able to serve both and also be able to anticipate and pick up on both. And we're nowhere near perfect. And I would say we're better at building that human connection because that's so in our roots. But our technology, and that's, also the benefit of being part of Macy's Inc., the technology has to be there too to allow that customer to have the seamless experience. And so we want to find a nice balance of anticipating but also following their lead on what they're looking for. But I do think, going back to what we were saying before, this really important realization that the customer does want to be in person for the most part and engage with people and product is a really important realization for how you run your business. And it's not just about getting them the product at their doorstep. And I think, or having the most seamless experience through the store necessarily. And I think Amazon style is a great example of how, if you optimize on every single attribute, it doesn't necessarily equal the optimal experience for the customer. And I loved going out to LA and seeing the Amazon style they opened there. And because it's very cool to see what are ways that we have not even thought about engaging with the customer that a tech company would look at it from. But there are also things that it's like 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2 in the way that you think. So it's just very interesting to try to lead the customer, but also be listening to them.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this, and I think even when we think about the terminology of like omni-channel, what does it actually mean? It means every channel. And that should have never been the goal, because the goal isn't to have everything. The goal is to have the right things that kind of work together in terminology. You know, someone we mutually follow and appreciate, Steve Dennis, calls it harmonized retail. How do these things work together to get that better element for a specific audience? And I think, interestingly enough, when you think about Bloomingdale's, and you mentioned Macy's and like kind of the different audiences, but Bloomingdale's did maybe one of the most interesting things in all of retail over the last few years with the launch of Bloomies. And so how do you see that within this wider framework of trying to reach new audiences, staying true to this legacy brand, but something slightly different and fresher? How do you kind of approach that? What have you learned from that experience?
Yeah, Bloomies is a really nice intersection between trying something new, but also really staying true to our roots. And even just the name, the customers that know us and love us for the longest amount of time actually call us Bloomies. So that's where that came from. But the number one goal of Bloomies is getting closer to the customer. And when you have these bigger stores, you can only get so close. And so by getting smaller, we're able to be more local and really be part of their day-to-day routine. It is possible with a bigger store, but just naturally we can be more in communities and neighborhoods. And so that allowed for us to get closer. Our product assortment is just as curated, if not more so, but it's the same brands they know and love from us. There really is not luxury. So what we also love about it is a way for us to shine in contemporary, which is such a strong suit for us, and about relationship building and leveraging technology to fuel that. So that's been the Bloomies. I don't even want to call it experiment because it's a real thing we're doing, but we now have 4 open, and it's been so fun to watch how it's both starting to scale, but also iterate and learn and grow, because our most recent one that opened a few months ago in New Jersey is on fire. And it's been great to watch how it's really come to life. And what's also been really fun about it is that we've been trying different models with the Bloomies store. So we call densification, which would be the New Jersey example. We have a very large presence in New Jersey, so we're densifying. Another one would be a new market. We opened one in Seattle, which is a very important market for many reasons. So trying to kind of get our name into new places. And then we also have a replace strategy where in Old Orchard, which is a mall outside of Chicago, we took a store that wasn't as productive as we'd like, but was really ingrained in the community. And we made it smaller and better. And it's pretty crazy, the ratio of the square footage of the store versus the sales. I won't say exactly what it is, but it's way better than 1-to-1. And so it's been very interesting to watch the model. But this most recent one, filling in where we have that relationship, was incredible, because the people coming through the door were so happy to see us in their local community versus having to drive 45 minutes or more to Short Hills.
You know what? It almost sounds too simple when we talk about things like small format, and you heard it was so buzzy over the last few years where, it's a small format strategy. But it's not like, you have a smaller store and now everything else is the same, or all of a sudden this is this secret unlock. It's very difficult, because especially in the department store space where your brand is curation. I trust you to figure out what I need and help me stay ahead with the products I want. It's really hard to do when you have to shrink space.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and you have to make very hard choices about whole departments. So our newest store in Shrewsbury, New Jersey, is an all-women's store. We do not have any like that. It's the first one of its kind. And it was actually a bit heartbreaking for us to say, we're not going to serve the male customer in this market. But making choices is part of downsizing. And downsizing, a smaller format, I should say. And something that's been very much on our mind right now, especially with the new CEO, where you're, bringing that discerning eye, is not doing everything okay. It's trying to really pick your spots and nail it. And so that was the thinking here. Let's, maybe try something new and take a bit of a risk and see what happens. And that's what's also the beauty of a smaller format store, is you can try some new things. It's not as big of a commitment. So it's been very interesting to watch.
Yeah, we are obsessed with this idea of focusing, especially when you don't have to have like 1,000 stores or thousands of stores, really focusing on that market, what that market needs, and that editing process of what does and does not belong is a very, very difficult process to go through.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And we lately have been starting weaving in more aesthetic coding into what we do. And that's always dangerous, right? Because the art and the science, you don't want to make art all science. But really thinking about, even if two brands are similar price point and similar kind of how contemporary they are, if the aesthetic or the style of the two brands is really different, they're actually not for the same customer necessarily, yet many stores put them right next to each other on the floor. And so and maybe that's the right choice, but it's something that we've been trying to look at really to bring the customer lens. And I think that shows up really well in this newest store, where we know that Jersey customer so well, and it's now more mid-Jersey, and not just the brands that we chose, but also curating the pieces within. You really feel it when you go there. Because I was walking around and I was feeling like, I don't know if I'm not finding anything. And I was like, well, I don't live here. That's, and not to say that only if you live there you could find something, but it actually was it felt good to think this store was actually not really curated for me. I'm not this customer. And so I thought it was very cool to feel that, versus everything feeling like it's for everyone. We want it to feel more personal to you.
Oh, I think if one size fits all is the fastest route to kind of a slow retail death in this market. And I think, advertisers as marketers, this idea of not having just a national strategy, but understanding how to tweak that for regions, for markets, per store, think about retail media, like this is game changing. This is the unlock of what the next decade is going to look like. I think one of the other areas I wanted to touch on, because I think it's been fascinating in the department store space, is we think about shifts of narrative. One of the big narratives was everyone's doing owned retail. Who needs wholesale relationships anymore? There's going to be 800 Nike stores and another 1,000 Adidas stores. And now we've seen the pendulum swing back. And it puts a lot of power back into the hands of the department stores, a lot of kind of these kind of wholesale channels. How have you seen that? What does that mean for the future of the department store?
Yeah, Nike's the best example, because it's, so loud how they're coming back. And I think maybe there's 3 different buckets of brands that are all doing this kind of thing right now. There's the D2C, the smaller brands that were maybe doing pop-ups, things like that they're now coming to department stores to help because customer acquisition costs are so high, or things like that. There's the Nikes that are these major mono brands, but kind of like a non-luxury mono brand. And then there's the mono brands that are luxury, all of which at first we're thinking, no, I want to be more profitable. I want to own my customer data. I want to build the relationship. And that is the fight of the department store, is telling them and proving to them why we are such an important part of their go-to-market strategy. And they really need to have a diversified portfolio, because as we saw during the pandemic, a lot of these luxury brands invested in these cities where people were migrating, building these beautiful large boutiques. And now they're feeling the pain of that commitment and that capital. And so I think that the core message that we want to get out there is that we are not just a place to buy, we are a place to be. And that people want to come and spend their time, because you're not just standing in front of one brand of product. And then, there's going to come a point where you're like, all right, like it's time to get out of here. We want you to come and shop for your kids, shop with your friends, buy gifts, get a makeover, go have lunch. There's so many things that could happen in the space of a department store, with so many different things going on, and personal appearances, get nail art, embroider. Like it's an emporium in a lot of ways. And this idea of, even if a customer is not there to buy Burberry, let's say, but it's important to Burberry, the customer understands the evolution of that brand. We are a massive space that they could tell that story for so many people, not just the people that are walking into a Burberry store. And so all of that to say, before we even talk about selling their product, right? It's just telling their story and talking about their brand. And something that's very important to Bloomingdale's values is that we are not just the Bloomingdale's brand and they need to get in line. We are all about celebrating their branding and their story and their codes. And so when a brand, especially a brand that has a shop, we like Jenny Kane we just brought in, we wanted them to tell their story because their stores are amazing. There's textures, it's a home. It's not just, sweaters. And so that was very important to us to say, this is your space to make it what you want because we want our customer to feel your brand. And that to us feels maybe different than some of our competition and is part of what that partnership looks like, not just you're here to serve Bloomingdale's.
Yeah, I think this idea of places where people want to spend time is the biggest theme we're seeing in physical stores and malls and shopping centers. How do you create, because again, whether the transaction happens there, happens later, you're going to see benefits from that, and it's so significant. Joe, I'm giving you a quick look to make sure. Do we have time for one more? I want to be sensitive to. Oh, all right, amazing. Oh, well,
10 minutes.
Well, of course. All right, so sorry guys, you're stuck with us for a while longer. We're going to keep on chatting. I think that idea is so significant, but also when you think about kind of that balance that you're looking to strike between we have a brand, you have all these things you expect from Bloomingdale's or Bloomies, but then at the same time we're trying to give this space to someone else to tell their story. Where is that line where, hey, we know what our customer wants and we know how to create that framework for you to succeed, but at the same time we want to give you that space for creativity to tell your own story?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Our CMO likes to say we're a branded house, but we are a house of brands. And walking that fine line is very interesting, and finding analogs in the industry to look to is also tough at times because people will talk about, oh, Apple is so amazing. It's like, how great would that be to, only sell these beautifully designed products that are your own, but we don't, it's a luxury and a curse in a lot of ways. Like I said, we have so many benefits, but it's something to think very hard about of, we sell so little that you can't find anywhere else. We definitely have private brands and we have exclusives, but the thing that is going to set us apart is not only going to be the product, and it can't, because you can buy that same sweater somewhere else, right? And so it has to be the curation of the product, the partnership with the vendors that they want to come to us and say, we're trying something new. We want to try it with you first. And also the way that you feel when you're on our site and in our store. And some of that is due to visual and environment, and some of that is due to human relationship. And for many people that doesn't apply, but for those that it does, it would break their heart to shop somewhere else because, like I said, that colleague is their friend. And for our very best customers, we plan all sorts of experiences in New York or near their store or across the world, and they get usually a +1 to bring. They almost always bring their seller. They don't bring their friend. They don't bring their spouse. They bring their colleague. I mean, not their colleague, their sales associate, because that's who they trust and that's who they want to spend their time with. And that really, so we really can't think of it as a commercial engagement in a lot of ways. It's a friendship. And that is built on not just saying buy, but what's going on in your life, So that's part of how we are differentiating that experience and why it's so important.
I think that leaning into it is so significant because, there is this tendency to say when you are a brand that is made up of brands, so people come into Bloomingdale's to buy all these other products, it's very easy, to lose your identity and say, hey, our brand is these other sub-brands, but it's not. Like, you are bringing something very specific.
Yes, and I think this is very much one that is always a work in progress, right? Because those brands stacked next to each other does not equal Bloomingdale's, like you're saying. And this is something actually with having a CEO now that's a year in. He came in, he was in Thailand before, and before that in Paris. And he said that in Thailand, when he resigned from his role and he was telling people where he was going, and he said Bloomingdale's, they were like, wow, that's great. And he realized the power of this brand, that in Thailand, where we do not have any stores nearby and have a very small online business, that they would recognize that that was a very exciting next step for him to go be the CEO of Bloomingdale's. And so we're always thinking, though, about how we can galvanize and make that stronger. And some of that also connects to the look and feel of our stores, which is something we're looking at now, thinking about how we evolve for the future. And something I was thinking about lately is that, when like Celine changed their logo and removed the accent or pick a different brand, that was a really big deal. And we were all talking about it. I think if Bloomingdale's changed their logo, I don't know if it would be that big of a deal. But I think it goes to show that these collections of brands tend to have less of a powerful brand identity than the brands themselves. And so how can we aspire to have that level of importance of brand that when we I mean, I do think actually if we change the big brown bags, people would talk about that. But I think it's a nice filter to think through of how can we build brand power in that way that people would care if we changed or evolved or went back or, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that evolution is such a slippery slope that you see. We've seen it in recent years. I mean, Google, Alphabet, like there can be business reasons why that makes sense, but you don't. A brand is a very difficult thing to lose and has to be handled with a tremendous degree of care.
Yes, definitely.
I want to end on one more, and then we'll open it up to questions. We talked a lot about Bloomingdale's. We talked a lot about the unique challenges. I think one of the things that's really interesting is this is a space that's faced a fair degree of scrutiny and a fair degree of change in the last few years. What do you, when you look at the department store space more broadly, what does the department store look like in an ideal state in 5 years from now, in 2030 or beyond?
Yeah, I think it connects to what we were saying before about being a place that you want to spend time. Our CEO talks a lot about how his ideal state is that Saturday morning, you wake up, you do your things, and then you're like, how should I spend my time? Let me stop by Bloomingdale's and just see what's going on, right? That's what we're aspiring for. What does it take to be that? You really need to listen to the customer, like I said before, because you need to find this right balance of product and commerce, but also space to spend time, engage, eat, drink, all these things that are not as revenue driving, right? And finding that right balance. And so I think that the ideal state in 2030 and beyond, at the minimum, our stores are all clean, up to standard. You feel good about whether you're at like a C market store versus an A market store. So bringing kind of all those fundamentals up. And then we've gone after that, the branding as we spoke about. So you really feel that Bloomingdale's brand. But also around every corner, there's something, that kind of makes you stop and inspires and interests you. So because that feeling of whether it's inspiration or the relationship, I think is what's going to make you want to keep coming back to spend time.
Keri, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Do we have questions?
Over here. I'm always on the wrong side of the room.
Thank you. Great stuff. Thank you both. Keri, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the future of the anchor store mall format, especially in light of companies like TJX that seem to have a different real estate footprint plan?
Yeah, this is something we've been talking about a lot, breaking down our store formats and what is the purpose of each of them and how all of our different departments are treating them differently. So I absolutely do think that there is a place for what we're calling a destination store, whether that's a mall anchor or not. I think what's tough is the state of the mall, because as we know that you're so impacted by your neighbors. Our goal, though, is that for a regional flagship or a destination that we can draw that traffic on our own because our store is so powerful. So our South Coast Plaza store in Southern California would be a great example. It actually is such an ideal state because what's going on around us is so much less important than what we have going on in our store. So that's what we are going after in those kinds of locations.
Good question. Any others? Oh, we have another. Excuse
me. Hi. I was very intrigued by a comment that you made earlier when you said you walked into the New Jersey Bloomies and you said, oh, this isn't for me. How are you specifically marketing the Bloomies sub-brand, if you will, today? And how does it roll up to the overarching brand? And what are you doing as it relates to kind of overarching brand elasticity to be able to kind of work it all through and have it make sense for the customer?
Sure. I'll just emphasize that I wasn't saying Bloomies is not for me. And I could say the same experience about a full line store too. This idea of my style not necessarily aligning with the way that store was assorted. But we've been on an interesting journey around marketing Bloomies. When we first launched, I think it had a larger marketing plan and presence as more of a standalone brand, let's say. But I think as we've been opening more, it's been more about how it fits into the Bloomingdale's ecosystem in that community. So some of the store environment, colors, and materials are definitely different for a Bloomies versus a full line Bloomingdale's. But for the customer, what we've been noticing is that it's just a smaller Bloomingdale's. And there are certain things curated about it, but it's not a totally separate brand. We want them to feel like it's part of this family and this brand that they're a part of. It's just another manifestation.
Hi there. Hey, Keri. Mary Beth Sheridan. How are you? Can you just speak to transcending generations? A lot of the successful brands in the past couple of years have really focused on broadening their appeal to be for Gen A, Gen Z, millennials, moms, across many generations. And that seems to be garnering new customer acquisition in a way that, is new and different. Can you touch upon Bloomingdale's strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Bloomies. See you. This is something that's so important in a model like ours, and something that we think about a lot, but also are very careful, because it's so easy to get drawn to that youngest generation and try to divert all resources and attention to what's going on with them, which now those trend cycles are shorter and shorter in a lot of ways. We're roughly a third in terms of our generations between millennial, X, and boomers, taking out the younger ones. And because of that, it's our responsibility to protect and continue to speak to and serve the Gen X and boomer customers that still have a lot of the wealth in the country, but also the majority of the relationships with our brand, because those younger customers, many of them have yet to build those relationships, or they're newer. And so those are the people that, like you said, they brought their children in to shop with them, and that will be the future of our brand. Or honestly, I'm hearing more that the kids are telling the mom what they should be buying because that's what they're, hearing about online. So we're just very careful to protect those different connections and really be balanced in how we think about it. I will say that as a brand, being young at heart is something that we see in common across most of our customer base, regardless of age. And so being playful and a little bit provocative and, dressing with a sense of fashion and trend is something that we see across generations. And so Aqua, our private label, which is one of our largest brands, you would think it was targeted towards, 35 and under, let's say. But the average age, or I won't say the average age, but we're seeing plenty of Gen X, baby boomers, and beyond finding themselves in that brand too. So what's really nice is we don't want to be one size fits all, but we want to be welcoming to our customer regardless of what generation they're in.
One of the fascinating things that we've also seen, if you look across retail, is in many cases, audiences will shift which brands, and they will shift into a brand that maybe they hadn't been associated with just a little bit before. And a lot of that is, you have to remember that patterns have changed. How, ages that people are getting married, how long they're living in an urban environment before they move into the suburbs, what that does to the amount of disposable income they have, what the challenges in terms of having to go to the office, how that impacts the fashion. And so I think so much of that is also changing things. And I would say that the strongest brands are the ones that recognize, look, obviously there's outreach you need to do and you need to make sure you're there for them. But when you lose that core identity, no one's going to shift back to you. You've lost something important. I think a lot of times what we've seen is audiences will move into a brand that we hadn't necessarily associated with a certain age cohort because their life status or life, with that period that they're living in has changed. And that can have a huge impact. I think we have time for one more.
Was there a hand back here? Oh, okay.
Right. And so, you know what? I will take the last one.
Oh, okay.
We've kind of discussed this all at length in the department store and how it's changing in all these different models you have. When you think about everything we've gone through over the last few years, the tremendous volatility, the pandemic, economic headwinds, the pursuit of value, what do you see as a major driving force in retail in the next year? What do you think is going to be the defining trend or so as we head into 2025?
That's very interesting. I do think in retail and our space in particular, the mergers, going private, the different things that are going on, I think will be huge for how the department store space will be impacted. Not necessarily bad, but just a lot of changing forces. And what's interesting about it too is it's of course a market share battle, but sometimes locations, right? If you look at where there's the overlapping locations, it's very interesting to look at. But also talent, I think that will be huge for us as well, is really thinking about how the talent landscape is shifting in the industry. So I think truly for us for the next year, I mean, I could say a million different things that will be important, but that's one that it's not just one, it's 3 big players, right, that are all impacted. And so it'll be very interesting to see the impact that has.
Amazing. Keri, thank you so much. Keri Taub, SVP Strategy at Bloomingdales.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you all
much.
so much for listening, and we will pass it back. Eric.